All right, UF has an absolute death march for a schedule this season. Toughest in the country. Honestly, might be one of the toughest that I can remember in recent memory. Um, Tough inside the SEC as always. Like I don't know that their SEC schedule is too much different than many teams, but having to go to Florida State, play Miami to open it up, and play UCF as well. There really are no bye weeks this year for UF. Um, I know you've asked other people this. I've heard you ask other people this. We've talked about this before, but I do want to get your take on it. How much more difficult does that schedule look because of UF's problems right now and just where UF is as a program? I mean, it'd be tough either way, but thoughts on the perspective there?
So the 2006 team is licking their chops at this schedule, right? The opportunity to prove that they are the reigning state champ and the opportunity to play the toughest of the tough in the SEC is something that a team like that cannot wait to get into. I think it's a little bit different because Florida hasn't been winning recently. There's a lot of big names on that schedule. There's also, though, if you really get into the rosters and these programs, there's programs with new head coaches, there's programs with new quarterbacks, there's programs, with a lot of roster turnover from the previous season. There's just a lot of question marks for a lot of the teams that Florida plays. So I think some of it is that that schedule is very intimidating in name, right? You've got the LSUs, you've got Texas, you've got Florida State, you've got Miami, you always have Georgia, you've got Ole Miss, who's been doing incredibly well. You have another game against UCF. There really isn't any gimme games on this schedule, but I think that Florida is going to have a good shot in probably 7 of them, a shot in 9 or 10 of them.
Yeah.
And some of that is they're gonna we're gonna see what they're made of. We're gonna see if they've cleaned up some things from one year to the next.
Yeah, they catch some teams at a good time, and it's backloaded like last year's was. It's more
Yeah.
difficult, but you'd probably rather catch Cam Ward in game one than
Heck
in
yeah.
game seven. You'd certainly rather that game be at home. A&M with a brand new coach. I think people are a little. I mean, A&M could be okay. They got a lot, but like you're catching them early in the year. Mississippi State has a host of problems, even though that game's on the road, and Florida's been kind of abysmal on the road. UCF, I think, is trickier than most people think, but then you do get Kentucky at home. Last year was really fluky, and if Florida's kind of figured out how to tackle, but then on the other side, right? Like, how good truly is Ole Miss? How did Texas reload? Where is LSU without Jaden Daniels? You'd love to get LSU early in the year with a new quarterback, but you don't. You'd love to get Florida State early in the year with a new quarterback, but you'll obviously know a lot more about those teams that replaced QBs later in the year. But it is certainly not easy if Napier doesn't hit whatever that magic number of wins is to move on, or doesn't look good enough. If it's a 3 or 4 win year, right, and UF really has no choice but to move on. Are there names in your mind? Are there people in your mind that you think like this is the direction that Florida should go if that was to go take place?
Yeah. Well, okay. So first and foremost, I want to say I want Billy Napier to be the guy. I think that he is capable of it. And I think that things are finally um, collaborative at the University of Florida right now. I think that the UAA has kind of woken up to the fact that, like, oh, we play a role in this too. There are some things that we could do better. I think Florida's NIL game has really been amplified with Florida Victorious. I think the very recent embracing of Florida Victorious by Scott Strickland, by Coach Napier, by the UAA as a whole is going to be a huge piece of this puzzle. I think that they are invested in giving him the tools he needs to be successful. Obviously, it still falls on Coach Napier whether or not at the end of the day he hits the number he needs to or shows the progress he needs to. But I think that for the first time in a long time, to be honest with you, predating Coach Napier, all of the powers that be are on the same page. And I think that we're going to see some really positive things come out of that. And I think that it was a little bit like asking Coach Napier and even the coaches before them to kind of fight with one hand tied behind their back. until they've decided, okay, we're going to full on embrace all of this. So I do want to say first and foremost, I want him to be the guy. I think he's got what it takes to be the guy. Now, if things don't go the way that Florida wants them to go, and I think for him to be let go prior to the 2025 season, things really do have to go off the rails. If Florida wins 3 or 4 games, I don't think it matters who your head coach is or how long they've been there. I think they would probably be out. So if that happens, who does Florida look to? I know a name that every Gator fan will say is Lane Kiffin, obviously current coach at Ole Miss, has some interesting ties to Florida. His ex-father-in-law is John Reeves, who is the famous Florida quarterback, but then also was on Spurrier's staff. He's obviously Monty Kiffin's son. Florida fans don't love him because when he was at Tennessee, he kind of had a little bit of back and forth from Urban Meyer, during the 13 months.
You just don't love him if he's not yours.
Right.
Once he's your jerk, it's okay.
Exactly. That's exactly how it is. And so, but I think that there's a lot of parallels between his personality and Steve Spurrier's personality, who is obviously very beloved by the Florida faithful. And I think the thing that's really interesting about Lane Kiffin is that he fully understands the importance of NIL. He is all in on it. He's vocal. He gets the social media game. And so and in turn, he's recruiting incredibly well. And he's kind of winning the hearts and minds of the fan bases. Now, this is a guy that could stay at Ole Miss for the rest of his career. They would be happy with 9 or 10 wins every single season. He could have all the co-eds he wants and life would be good, right? There is something to be said for playing out the rest of your career at the Grove. But if he wanted that challenge, if he wanted to see if he could take the next step, I think that Florida's a program he could do that with. He's familiar with Gainesville. His family is familiar with Gainesville. I think that makes a lot of sense there. Now, I think that there would be some older Gators who would have to swallow their pride because they, hated him from the time that he was at Tennessee. But I think that could make sense. Another person that I think could make sense is Jedd Fisch. A really interesting story about him. I don't know if you know this story or not, but he went to the University of Florida. And when he was a student at the University of Florida, he really wanted to work for the football team. So he kept trying to meet Spurrier. And so he kept going to the football offices, trying to see him, couldn't. So eventually he resorted to leaving a note on Spurrier's car every single day, asking to be hired, to work in the equipment room or just do something. And eventually Spurrier hired him. And that is how he got his coaching start. And he was hired literally as an assistant equipment manager or something very, very small at the beginning. But he was passionate about football and he was passionate about getting his foot in the door with somebody that he looked at as, one of the best coaches of all time. So, I think that would be, I don't know, maybe a little bit of a homecoming there. And so I think that is something that Gator fans would be excited about. I think it's something that could fit. Once you get past those two, it's really hard to see, who do you get to come to Gainesville? Because you've got to get somebody who more than likely is young, because if you pay attention to these coaches that are 50 plus, they don't love what the game looks like today. And they don't necessarily want to participate in what the game looks like today. So you've got to go after somebody young. But if Florida were to be searching for a coach going into the 2025 season, I would remind all the powers that be that this is not an on-the-job training place. Hire a name that has done it in the bigs.
I was going to be, my follow-up is, do you think they would, it seems like when you're in kind of a coaching cycle and any program, which Florida seems to be in right now, you go well-established name and then you go group of 5 and then you go well-established name. And then so at this point you feel like there's no chance they'd go back to, not that there aren't good group of 5 coaches out there. That's not like a slam toward anybody that's come from there. Mike Norvell came, but I feel like they'd go in a different direction because you just think it didn't work last time. We need to do something different.
I think with coaching searches, we get a lot of revisionist history. I think people have questioned Napier's hire, but we talk about the fact that LSU liked him too. Like there were other huge names after him. I've heard people say that, Dan Mullen, how did we go after Dan Mullen? Dan Mullen had Mississippi State to heights that they had never been to before. People will say, Will Muschamp, how did we give this guy a head coaching job? Well, he was Texas's coach in waiting. He was the hot name at the time. Urban Meyer from Utah, if you can say he knew what he was walking into in the SEC, having coached only at Utah, probably not, right? But that one worked out. So I do think we get a lot of revisionist history when we think about these things. But I do think getting a coach who has coached in this league, and I know Napier was an assistant in the SEC, but if you can get somebody with head coaching experience in either the SEC or the Big Ten, I do think that is going to allow for a quicker rebuild.
We talked a little bit about NIL on another video. Do you feel like NIL at Florida is set up to not only support Coach Napier, but any new coach that may come in? Do you feel better about where it's at in general?
Yeah, I feel really good about where Florida Victorious is. I think that they've gotten some new blood infused within the organization recently that has really kind of hit it hard from the marketing standpoint. If you went to the orange and blue game, you saw how different it felt. Their fans got to go on the field to meet the entire team and staff if you were a Florida Victorious member. And I'm telling you what, the lines were like wrapped around the stadium to get down onto the field. I personally was so impressed with the number of fans who, had to be members, were signed up to go down there. And it just kind of has a different energy. It's nice to see Scott Strickland publicly supporting Florida Victorious. It's great to see the same thing for Coach Napier. We saw it, on his social media, but then he did an interview with Josh Pate where he really talked about Florida Victorious. This has been kind of the missing piece for Florida. I think people are like, okay, well, are they collaborating together? Are they separate entities? How does this work? If I've got money to donate, should I donate to the UAA for their building funds, or should I donate to NIL? And and the answer to that right now is NIL, right? And I think that the university, though, is finally embracing and accepting that, and that is going to pay dividends.
So I've got a really big question that I feel like people are going to hate, but I'm going to ask you that anyway. But before I do it, I'll tease them a little bit. Where can people follow you? Where can they find your work?
On Twitter, you can follow me at Allie_Peak. Allie is ALI. Peak is PEEK. And then on YouTube, you can check out A Peek Inside Gators Football. There's lots of new content posted multiple times a week now.
All right. I know you have a personal relationship here, and so I'll ask this, but do you think that there's a part of UF that somewhat regrets moving on from Mullen, just given how NIL could very much have assisted maybe his greatest weakness based on how good of a coach he was?
So what I will say about Coach Mullen, and I have maintained this from the day he was fired, firing Coach Mullen was punting on third down. Now, sometimes that can work out for you, right? If you know that you're going to be able to, let's say, force that returner to fumble and you're going to recover it and score a touchdown, it was worth punting on third down. But you better do something huge if you're going to do that. And I don't know that Florida has done that yet. I think that Coach Mullen was struggling with recruiting. I think there are multiple reasons for that. I don't think that he loves the idea of kissing the butt of some 18-year-old kid, I also think that he felt very handcuffed, that he didn't necessarily have the resources that some of the other places had. If you think about the things that Florida has accomplished since Coach Napier came here, some of which were in the works for Coach Mullen. Something as simple, I'll give you an example. Coach Mullen was always so frustrated that the UAA wouldn't let him wear black jerseys. He wanted black jerseys because the kids thought they were cool, not because he cared one way or the other, but he knew it would help recruiting because the young kids wanted black uniforms. The UAA continually denied him. Coach Napier got to wear them last year. Now, hopefully we never wear them again and they get burned. But that is like a small example of, I think, the hitting his head against the wall that Coach Mullen felt. And I would be interested to see what he could do with the resources that have been provided to Coach Napier. But can't look backwards, right? We have hired Coach Napier. He is the guy. He is building what I do think is a solid foundation, and I hope that he is going to be successful.
Leave it to the special teams girl to come up with a punting analogy for hiring and firing coaches. So, all right, we were somewhat negative in this video. We gave you the doom and gloom. If you want the more positive, if you want a little bit more happy, go lucky, we're going to turn this thing around. Click the video on the screen right now to check that out.